Good morning.
By the early 2000s, thanks to the power of a new generation of game consoles, polygonal graphics were not just becoming the new innovation for fighting games, but the expectation. Many longtime developers struggled during this transition to 3D, but they all knew that if they wanted to be successful, this would be a requirement of them going forward. With the Tekken series being heavily attached to PlayStation hardware, and the company's other fighting game Soul Calibur launching on the Sega Dreamcast, Namco was well regarded as setting the new benchmark for both fighting games and 3D design. After the unexpected success of Tekken 3 and Tag, the developers were granted an opportunity to be more experimental with the next installment in the series. Namco had recently developed a new arcade system board using the technology of the PlayStation 2 as a basis, called Namco System 246, which was used for a number of Namco-developed games and licensed for use by other manufacturers. Komoto, Harada, and Yonemori returned as the project directors, while designer Yutaka Konoe and composers Nobuyoshi Sano and Keiichi Okabe departed from the project. Akitaka Toyama returned to work on the soundtrack, though his contributions were equally shared with fellow composers Satoru Kosaki, Yu Miyake, Hiroshi Okubo, and Keiki Kobayashi. Tekken 4 would officially release in arcades in 2001 and the following year on the home console. The benefits of the new system board were immediately seen by players, as Tekken 4 featured a brand new graphics engine that allowed for enhanced lighting, dynamic physics, and smoother surfaces both in the characters and the environments. Even though the number of polygons for each character model was supposedly less than they were in Tekken Tag, they still managed to feature a high level of detail. When players got their hands on Tekken 4, its newest gameplay additions were noticed right away, as they could now side maneuver around their opponent before the round started. Stages now featured environmental hazards in the form of walls, obstacles, and floors with elevation that players could use to extend the damage of a combo. A counter option available to players was a new switch maneuver that enabled them to grab their opponent and strategically move them to another position on the stage that would put them at a disadvantage or turn the tide in their favor. Tekken 4 takes place 2 years after the events of Tekken 3, when it is discovered that Kazuya Mishima is alive despite being killed by his father at the end of Tekken 2, a scene which is recreated in the opening cinematic. 17 playable characters made a return from previous Tekken games, and some of them even featured a dramatic change in appearance, like Paul Phoenix, Hwoarang, and Yoshimitsu. The 6 new characters introduced in Tekken 4, bringing the roster to 23, included a capoeira student of Eddie Gordo named Christy Montero, a young boxer named Steve Fox, a robot named Combot designed to mimic other characters' fighting styles similar to Mokujin, an Australian Valley Tudo fighter named Craig Marduk, and Violet and Miharu, who served as palette swaps for Li Xiaolan and Ling Xiaoyu respectively. While the last game's protagonist, Jin Kazama, was featured in Tekken 4, he came included with a newly revamped moveset and animations, which is why some consider his inclusion to be on par with that of a brand new character. When Tekken 4 was released on PlayStation 2, the Tekken Force minigame from Tekken 3 made a return and was notably expanded upon. There was also the inclusion of a story mode that was more extensive than anything seen before in the series, as it featured numerous cutscenes using the in-game graphics and fully voiced performances. Tekken 4 received generally positive reviews at release, but over time, the general consensus on the game has become mixed due to a variety of factors. For starters, the roster was much smaller than the previous one, so some fan favorites were bound to be absent. The redesigns for returning characters also weren't well received. Tekken 4's greater emphasis on cutscenes in the story mode wasn't impressive either, thanks to character models that didn't look so good up close, combined with subpar writing and voice acting.
I never got to fight you at the tournament. I'll take you on right here, right now.
There's no reason to fight.
You ain't got one? Well, I do!
The soundtrack was also unremarkable, with music that had a more disjointed or subdued vibe instead of the catchy, rhythmic, and actively engaging feel of Tag. Much of the sound effects were also very similar, like they were just being recycled. Then there was the matter of Tekken 4 coming out just a little over a year after Tekken Tag Tournament came to PlayStation 2. Players were still very fond of the system mechanics presented in 3 and expanded upon in Tag, as evidenced by its strong following and reception at the time. With such a large player base, expectations for balance and fine-tuning are bound to be much higher when it comes to the competitive community. With Tekken 4 having a greater emphasis on sidestepping and environment interaction, many of them felt the general character movement became much slower and less fluid when compared to Tag. At high-level play, the game was considered very broken due to a number of the new mechanics being easily exploitable. The changes to the engine made for a greater emphasis on quick jabs and punches, instead of more complex moves and strategies. Jin Kazama in particular was considered very overpowered compared to the entire roster, making him one of the most often chosen characters by top players. Tekken 4 could still be praised for its experimental nature, and overall the game was still a solid effort, but any of its commendations easily becomes overshadowed when compared to its contemporaries at the time. Namco's Soul Calibur series became an overnight sensation as a launch title for the Dreamcast and a sequel that became heavily anticipated. Developer Tecmo and Team Ninja were also making waves in the genre with its Dead or Alive series that featured fast gameplay and a strong presentation, and longtime rival Sega made a triumphant debut on the PlayStation 2 with Virtua Fighter 4, which many still considered to be one of the greatest fighting games of all time, thanks to its comprehensive features and fine-tuned gameplay. Polygonal fighting games had become a well-solved puzzle, as many developers had their own different but successful interpretations on the formula. Tekken 4 was criticized for being overly familiar in some aspects, while notably uninspired in others. Despite being financially successful, the game was not perceived as being on the same level from a technical or innovative standpoint as its predecessors or its competition, which was especially disconcerting considering its lineage. Tekken 4 is often regarded by fans to be the worst main game in the series, while also being the most experimental, as it features several game-changing mechanics that would never return in later iterations. While director Katsuhiro Harada understands the reaction to the changes being mixed, he also felt that the feedback from players was not always constructive, comprising mostly of harsh reactions without suggesting improvements. Tekken was still a valuable franchise, but the series ran the risk of relying on their past achievements and slowly becoming irrelevant as other fighting games left them behind. Harada understood that going forward, they would have to strongly reconsider how player feedback on the series was received and respond back as big and loudly as they could. Next time, in part 4 of this Tekken Retrospective, the official 5th chapter in the series begins with a thunderous introduction, as the developers attempt to right the wrongs of the past entry while making a strong impact to its loyal fans and among the fighting game community.
Heihachi Mishima is dead.
Silence! I hope you've slept well. Because now you die. You have grown strong, Egg. Prepare to meet Iron Skillet.
Oh yeah, Tekken 4 is here. Punish your enemies with new moves, interactive environments, and new fighters. It's a legend so deep, no one just plays it, they live it. Tekken 4, rated T for teen.
Sister, win. Cat Flap win. Secretary win. Murdoch win. Life win.